Today we are covering the emotional drivers behind irritable bowel syndrome. Irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS for short, is a very common ailment. Studies show around 10 to 15% of the US adult population is thought to have IBS, and women are diagnosed more often than men. So, like with many syndromes that we're familiar with, IBS has no real cause that can be isolated. It's simply a collection of similar symptoms. Welcome back to the Mind Change podcast. I am your host, Heather McKean. Before we get started, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and download. It really helps us continue to create all this great free content for you and others. Now, the term irritable bowel syndrome first came into use in the mid 1940s. And interestingly, as research on this condition has increased, a large-scale genetic study revealed shared origins of irritable bowel syndrome and mental health disorders. Again, big surprise, IBS was one of my many diagnoses. Basically, if you're having pain in your abdomen, changes or difficulties in bowel movements, or bloating, you may have IBS. And yet our gut is always communicating with us. It's one of the first lines of defense. It has long been known that stressful events can affect bowel function. So it would be safe to assume that long-term, unprocessed stress or negative experiences would eventually show up as a bowel condition. And yet, rather than a push to treat stresses or the contributing factors, most people would rather just take a pill. But let's just say overall, our guts are not happy. So what else might our bowels be trying to communicate? Well, let's look at some of the emotional drivers behind irritable bowel syndrome. Now, the most common overarching driver is that people are holding on to toxic events, ideas, past hurts, beliefs, or childhood traumas. Now, the digestive system, if we think about it, is meant to absorb all of the minerals, nutrients, and good stuff, right, from what we eat and drink. And that really corresponds metaphorically to our need, really even on a survival level, for nurturing, right? So we're meant to process the events that happen in our lives, absorbing what is useful and helpful and will serve us long term, and then releasing or excreting whatever might be toxic or harmful to our system. Now, I don't know about you, but not many of us know how to do that effectively. We weren't taught how to do that. It's not spoken about, and oftentimes it's never modeled for us. Now, lots of crap is being passed down genetically and environmentally. And some of us are actually holding on to a lot of crap that we should have let go of. And sometimes stuff that's not even ours when we're talking about ancestral, epigenetic, or genetic factors, right? Some of the stuff that we've been holding on to are long-lasting generational family ideas or beliefs, and then they land with us and we're actually carrying an unbalanced share. So not only what happens in our life, which frankly, a lot of the stuff that happens in our life is because of the lenses that were passed down to us, but we're also carrying so many of their unprocessed traumas, right, epigenetically. So IBS can have a person going back and forth between states. Often people have bouts of constipation and then bouts of diarrhea. So these are two different things happening in the body, but for similar reasons. Now, the constipation happens when we're holding back and holding on to things that we keep trying to control, right? We're getting stuck in the past. We're referencing our present and our now from those lenses of hurt or pain or injustice from the past. And subconsciously, the fear is that if we let go of these perceived or actual offenses against us, then what we're doing is letting people, or even ourselves at times, off the hook. Now, eventually, that gets very heavy if we're holding on to all of that, holding on to all of these past offenses or ideas, or things are just sort of backing up on us, right? So not only does it back up on us emotionally, it then tends to back up on us physically. And without that experience in healthy emotional expression or regulation, we will tend to oscillate to the other extreme when things get too big for us. And then we launch into the diarrhea cycle of this. And that is where all that stuff that we've been trying to control and hold on to just seems to, just completely explode out of our control. That's where people spiral, right? And then because of it's really the lack of control that puts our mind and body into this really hyper aware, hyper vigilant state. Then all that stuff that we were holding back, we begin spewing out. So it's fear and anger and resentment, right? And so you may see those cycles not just physically in our body with the constipation oscillating to the diarrhea, but in our emotional way of communicating and being as well. So when we've gone to that other side of just everything's out of control and we realize we're just spewing, then we, in response to that, have an urgency to just hide, like run, hide, get away from everyone. And if you think about it, when there is those times of diarrhea, that is, we don't know if we can go out. You're sort of thinking through with bathrooms, and it's likely, and I've known very many people who, because of this condition, end up more homebound because the fear of oscillating to the diarrhea and having it hit unexpectedly or urgently keeps them inside. What they don't realize is it's a subconscious thing trying to keep them safe. Now, from a childhood perspective, some of the ways that we get here is that it's very likely for a person who does IBS to have a history where they maybe didn't get the kind of support or nurturing or validation that they needed as a child. And the way that they perceived that was that they were being let down so often in childhood that as an adult, we tend to become overly controlling at times, right? If the idea is that even the adults in our life can't follow through, if the adults in our life aren't able to give us what we need, then why would anybody else out there? So we tend to get a little bit more controlling and keep our circle a little bit smaller so that we think we're mitigating the possibility of us being hurt more often. Your family growing up in childhood may have felt chaotic and unreliable, right? And that's a little bit of this oscillation that we're getting, that chaos is being represented. The chaos that we had in childhood is now being represented physically in our own body. And some of that chaos may have felt like or look like you never know what you're going to get, right? You could walk in the house or a primary caregiver could walk in and you just never know what you're going to get. Are you going to get love, attention, laughter, or are you going to be maybe belittled or ignored or yelled at or even abused? And it's the insecurity and the chaos, that oscillation between what am I going to be met with causes that hypervigilance in the body that we're still doing into adulthood without oftentimes realizing why. Now, when we talk about that chaos or that unreliability, that can also be a physical reality as well. So, for instance, if poverty was present, then we may have been exposed to kind of that feast or famine mentality. And not only with material goods, like we have groceries to the point where we go possibly even days without having a solid meal. And I know in my history, there were times that the electricity would be off or we didn't have heat in the wintertime. And those different things of never knowing what to expect can contribute to that sort of chaos feeling, that oscillation feeling. So that feast or famine mentality can very much happen with our physical needs. But it's also common that can happen with emotional needs as well, where it seems like parents can maybe either be very maybe protective, or they can be very doting in one minute and then just completely absent feeling in another. And again, I don't think it can be overstated. It is that insecurity, that unknown that is being represented still in our body. So in addition to all of this, there's often a subconscious fear of letting go of what you do know because you worry that it's all you have. So if you think about if there is that feast or famine mentality, then you know what you have. At least you know what you have. And the fear is, what if I have less? What if I get less? Or if we're talking about there's peace, or there's the known and the comfortable of what you know. The subconscious fear is, if I let go of this, something worse could happen. And what that does is it just keeps us in alignment with those old patterns, those old beliefs. And when that's the case, without even realizing it, we are often surrounding ourselves with toxic relationships and toxic environments because that is what we know. And though you may recognize them, it's often only after it feels like it's too late that we make any changes. So for instance, that's where maybe we've set ourselves up in a job or a marriage, or a familial relationship, or your friendship circle is really built on this kind of chaotic, toxic insecurity, and you don't even know it because it's so familiar. So when you start to realize that's what's going on, and then you step back and you're like, oh my goodness, this is all I have. This is every relationship. And then the cost feels very high at that point, and that can be challenging moving forward and thinking about changing. Another possible emotional driver for IBS is constantly thinking through worst case scenarios so that you can be prepared. Now, this makes complete sense because our child brain believes that had we just been able to figure out the pattern or the formula to know what was going to walk through the door, right? Then we would have been prepared, and it wouldn't have been so hard. Now, the truth is, there was likely no formula, and there was likely nothing you could have done as a child to be prepared. That's not something you would have wanted to be prepared for. The preparedness doesn't actually make it any easier, right? But that's the belief, and it's a childlike belief because it was programmed in from a child's understanding, and that still replays. Now, the way that shows up in adulthood is that constant thinking through, if I can just think through all the bad things that could happen, then I'll be prepared to make it through. And unfortunately, what we don't realize is what we give the most attention to is what we see more of and can even attract. So while we think that we're doing our best by preparing for anything bad that can happen, so often we are actually creating it, or at least attracting it. And what that does is it just sort of reinforces this long-held idea that life is hard, it's unsafe, it's unfair. And then we tend to hold on to the negative and overlook the good. And if you think about that, again, metaphorically in the digestive system, what's going to happen in your bowels if you're holding on to the stuff that's not good for you and leaking out all of the good stuff, the vitamins, the minerals, the nutrients, right? We're definitely going to have an imbalance there. Something else that's commonly spoken or felt with a driver behind IBS is you feel taken advantage of or attacked by influential people in your life. Again, that is easy to track back to childhood, from whoever it was. It could be one parent, it could be both, or it could be another primary caregiver, it could be a teacher, it could be, a nun or a priest or something like that you dealt with that had a major impact on your life. And if you had that relationship with them that I never know what I'm going to get, that can start to feel like influential people have this power over you or this control over you, and it doesn't feel good. All of this takes an extreme toll on our gut and the way that we digest not only food, but life experiences as well. Metaphorically, the gut houses our deep wisdom and intuition. But when we're in survival mode, we're often not listening to ourselves, right? This causes a disconnect in that we are recreating and perpetuating this lack of nurturing and validation that we experienced in childhood. Only now, it's just us not listening to us, right? Our gut. We're not listening, and we're not validating. We're not really hearing what it's really saying. And so in essence, our gut is just being treated by us like we felt like we were treated as a child. Now, this condition serves to keep us in the victim mentality because it is often blamed on food intolerances or other outside factors. But even the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases has stated on their official website that functional gastrointestinal disorders, such as IBS, are problems with the brain-gut interaction, how your brain and gut work together. And experts think that problems with the brain-gut interaction will affect how your body works and can cause IBS symptoms. So there are certain things that people with IBS also experience. And experts think that these problems may play a role in how people deal with stress, how they deal with the performance sexually, and also, of course, that's going to affect our mental health in so many ways. And so, if even these kind of places are making these connections, then I think that it's something we should just take note of, right? So it's clear that more than just food is at play here. And as with most conditions that we talk about on this podcast, the way out is to go inside the brain, where we have been programmed and coded by a lifetime of input. And if we can change the input, the output will naturally follow. So it is time to deal with all the crap that has gotten all backed up. Well, thank you again for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you every other week as we dive into the fascinating topic of the emotional drivers behind illness and disease. Please make sure to go and leave us a comment with those 5-star reviews. And also go to our YouTube channel to comment on maybe a disease or a symptom or an ailment that you would like to hear covered in one of our upcoming episodes. Until next time, thanks for joining us on the Mind Change Podcast, where we are changing the world one mind at a time.